Chapter 19. Planting Seeds. They arrived at Canterlot train station mere moments before the morning train was set to depart. There, they met up with the Royal Guard unit assigned to travel with them out to Haysteam. The Pegasus Corporal of the 5-pony squad wasn't happy to be there, but he was happy to make sure they knew it. In a passive-aggressive sort of way. He and his squad had been pulled off searching for Rocky Bed for this trip. Corporal Fleet Glass prioritized rescuing a foal more than some riot, no matter how much damage had been caused. Then again, he lived in Canterlot and therefore didn't have to put up with said riots. Nor was he happy about having to work under a night guard, and a Thestral one instead of one of the few normal night guards. Well, that was just the barb on the thorn. None of the 5 royal guards said it out loud, and were careful to keep it professional as they all sat in the same train carriage. But inside, they obviously thought, it's not one of them's place to give us orders. We know how to do our job without some bat pony getting in our way. Prey got his own fair share of looks, although most of them were incredulous rather than guarded. After Topaz Honey, Prey was in a foul mood, and the unicorn in the group did not help calm his taut nerves at all.
Why have you brought a lamb? Are we taking her back to her flock at Haysteam or something? One of the royal guards had eventually asked.
They responded in disbelief once Gloom had gone through the usual explanation.
Seriously? A night guard? Which bat pony thought up that idea? She? He. Should still be in school. Does she even go to school? It was Her Majesty Princess Luna thought it up, Gloom replied flatly.
The royal guards clammed up after that. Corporal Fleet Glass taking it upon himself to give the unicorn member of his squad who'd so badly put his hoof in his mouth a stern word. Prey saw in his thoughts that Fleet Glass was actually secretly relieved that it hadn't been him who'd asked the question, as he had been thinking the exact same thing himself. Prey sat in the corner, which, incidentally, was as far from the unicorn as he could get with their current seating arrangement, and avoided everybody's eyes.
Nothing but a small, shy, demure little sheep over here. No threat whatsoever.
Gloom sat down opposite Prey and pulled out a roll of paper and a pencil.
Here, write up that list of ponies from the cells yesterday. You haven't forgotten, have you?
Have you?
Prey returned, taking the proffered items. Gloom made a contemplative sound.
So. I might have forgotten a few of the details. Things like their ages and where they live. We're in a hurry. Can you remember everything we need?
Gloom asked again. Prey's eyes flicked to the royal guards sitting not far away. They weren't paying more than passing attention. Good.
I said I could, and I can. Just give me a moment, and then you can give them the list so they can make their own copies, sir.
By the time the train pulled up in the little station of Haysteam, the list had been completed, and, rather conveniently, the unicorn just so happened to be able to copy the list, using a spell in combination with his telekinesis to write out everything his eyes read.
A double spell link,
Prey observed, unnoticed from the back.
One between the eye and the mind, and one between the mind and the pencil.
He hid a shiver and put a few more bodies between him and the unicorn.
Only a tier 2 at most. But he has excellent fine control. That doesn't seem like a common utility spell.
That observation was more than enough for Prey to want to keep his distance. It was a bright day outside the train. Their emergence onto the platform drew significantly more eyes from the townsfolk than their entrance had yesterday. The bright gold and white of the royal guards was certainly eye-catching, but more likely, word had simply gotten around, no doubt spread by those ponies they'd released from Turf Apple's custody yesterday. That, or a load of inaccurate rumors. With how skittish ponies could be and their recent troubles in Haysteam, the odds significantly favored the second possibility. Gloom was quick to take control of the situation.
Corporal Fleet Glass, I think it best if our first destination is Seed Apple's farm. It was him who was harboring Pepper Mill and denied us entry yesterday. Turf Apple is probably passed out drunk somewhere, so we can pick him up at our leisure. He has nowhere to run, and he knows it,
Gloom instructed, leading the way.
Did you not try and force an entrance at the farm, sir?
Corporal Glass asked as he and the rest of his squad fell into step behind Gloom, with Crimson smoothly stepping up to trot beside Gloom, leaving Prey to try and catch up. Like always.
They refused, and were on the brink of making their refusal violent. I didn't judge it worth it, Gloom answered. So were reinforcements then, Fleet Glass said.
Gloom's leathery wings gave a twitch.
More or less,
Gloom said, making it not quite an admission of needing assistance. Instinctively, Gloom disliked making the Night Guard, and, by extension Luna, look incompetent.
"So we're going to be entering and searching the premises, right?"
the corporal inquired as they marched through Haysteam.
"Yes. That will be your task while we interview Seed Apple. Almost certainly followed by arrest and detainment,"
Gloom answered, eyes fixed on their path as he led the way.
"Yes, sir,"
Fleetglass acknowledged, sounding neither approving or annoyed by Gloom's orders, which essentially admitted they were only there to act as intimidation to ensure the compliance of Seed Apple and his family. As Prey had already noted, Fleetglass meant to keep this professionalism. Besides, wasn't that what a guard's job boiled down to in the end? An armed and armored presence that existed to ensure compliance from the population. That's exactly how the border guard operated. The townsfolk moved out of their way, but perhaps unusually, didn't do more than that. In fact, they didn't even look overly perturbed at the Royal Guard's presence, despite the rumors that must have been going around and the general unrest caused by the recent riot. Maybe after all the riots, the majority of them were simply resigned, or perhaps glad that the Royal Guards were finally here to do something about it. Indeed, the only one who seemed to be drawing overtly nervous or, in some cases, fearful looks was Gloom with his thestral heritage.
Ah, racism at its finest. Such a refreshingly defining characteristic of ponies, known worldwide to everyone but themselves.
Prey observed cynically as he trailed in their group's wake, using them to avoid drawing attention. Prey paused as they passed the familiar apothecary from the day before, his stop going unnoticed by the guards who continued marching on, more intent on reaching their destination with golden helmeted heads held high than looking behind them. Honestly, they wouldn't have lasted 2 days in the deeper green. Picking off the rearmost member was a favorite of the predators in those dark trees. Prey thoughtfully touched the bandage around his ear. The apothecary had been a major disappointment yesterday, but perhaps it might prove to have one redeeming quality. A quick glance at the still-moving guard squad showed him that they were pulling ahead. Oh well, if they didn't care enough to see if their magically bound criminal lamb was still with them, then he should be able to afford a few minutes before his absence was noticed. It only took 5 minutes. He'd slipped in, taken what he needed, and slipped out. In fact, Prey could have done so in only 2 minutes and still remain unnoticed by the unobservant shop assistant behind the counter. The extra 3 minutes were because there was an actual couple in there, browsing the shelves. Any opinion Prey held of aforementioned couple was immediately lowered by that mere act itself, and it would have fallen even further, if it had existed at all, when he saw that they were actually buying from this ridiculous shop. Sun-patterned placemats and scented candles of all things. Anyway, he could have snuck straight in and out. The shop's setup meant that there was plenty of shelves and rotating racks filled with strange postcards to use for cover. But then Prey caught a passage of passing thought from one of the couple. It was enough to make him pause for those additional 3 minutes to see if he could pick up any related follow-up information. Unfortunately, the stallion's thoughts didn't stray into that area again, so Prey stole what he'd come in for and left.
"Where have you been, Prey?" Gloom hissed.
The Night Guard sergeant had been pacing back and forth at the entrance to Seed Apple's farm, when Prey had popped out of the tall grass not 3 yards away from the anxious Threstrel. Crimson and the Royal Guards were nowhere in sight, meaning they must have already entered the farm to search it.
"I had to waste time and send a guard back to look for you,"
Gloom admonished angrily. Prey saw in Gloom's thoughts that the guard he was referring to was a Pegasus from the Royal Guard squad, who he'd sent flying back the way they'd come to stand for Prey. Evidently, Prey's habit of sneaking everywhere meant they'd missed him.
"You're the one that left me behind,"
Prey returned calmly, seemingly not affected by Gloom's frustration. He was more worried thinking about tonight.
"Don't give me that. You could have called out, not just hung back,"
Gloom snapped.
"You didn't have any problem with it yesterday,"
Prey said, glancing past Gloom into the farm.
"You sent the rest of your guards in to begin the search, I take it?"
He commented.
"Shame. I would have enjoyed being there to see the look on Seed Apple's face when the Royal Guard barged right over his protests and marched in."
"They're not my guard, Prey. I'm just a sergeant, and in an entirely different chain of command, might I add. And you're making excuses. Yesterday was different. Today is another matter entirely," Gloom said.
"It's not my fault I'm small. I have trouble keeping up. And might I point out, in return, that it was you who forgot all about me again and left me behind, sir?"
"You know perfectly well you could have spoken up, but you didn't," Gloom repeated in frustration. Your silence could be interpreted as a lapse of duty, or an attempt to escape. I shouldn't have to repeat this, but you're on probation. Remember, Prey.
I haven't forgotten. I'm still wearing gold manacles in case you haven't realized,
Prey said with a scowl, waving a golden-banded foreleg under Gloom's nose.
And you know I wasn't trying to escape.
That's not the point, Prey, and you can't wander off and expect there to not be consequences. You could have just asked one of us to carry you.
Never going to happen, sir.
We are on duty, on a serious case, working with the Royal Guard. Having to send out a flyer to search for you during the middle of an important investigation is both a misuse of resources and a lax in duty, Gloom stated hotly. Prey backed away, but his glower made it clear he wasn't backing down.
Sir, I am not blind. I can easily see you're just trying to scare me into submission because you're concerned about what the Royal Guards will think of the ISND for being so unprofessional as to have A, brought along a lamb, and B, lost him.
I'm not trying to scare you, Prey. I'm trying to make you stop and think next time, Gloom said, reining in his rapidly building temper. Gloom took a couple of deep breaths, and when next he addressed Prey, he was much calmer. And yes, I'm concerned. As should you. We are the Night Guard, representatives of Princess Luna at all times and in all places. And we are currently representing the Night Guard, in public, to the Royal Guard. We cannot afford any slips which might, through us, reflect badly on Her Majesty. Prey refrained from spitting at that. That was the first proper confrontation he'd had with Gloom, his unofficial warden, but the cause was hardly his fault. He was halted from giving a response by a commotion behind Gloom on the farm, which made them both stop and look. It was between two royal guards and someone who looked like Seed Apple's wife. She was protesting loudly at something, the royal guards calmly but firmly pushing her away. Prey looked back to Gloom.
Seems to be going fine to me, meaning I wasn't needed in the first place. Either don't leave me behind or don't complain when I have to catch up,
Prey said.
Because I have much bigger worries than merely being late,
Prey silently added. Prey, Gloom said warningly. You know I don't care much for formality, and I don't like reprimanding you, but you're treading it fine to the line. We're a unit, and I'd like to think we're friends too.
Friends? Friends?
Prey thought derisively. But our duty comes first. Okay, I'll admit that we left you behind, but I still have to reprimand you, Gloom warned him. Prey wasn't concerned. Firstly, because it was a weak threat, and second, because he could read the sergeant's thoughts and saw that Gloom didn't actually plan to dish out any real punishment. He was merely saying it to try and give Prey a scare to behave in the future. So Prey made sure to act slightly sullen as he looked away.
As you wish, sir,
he answered. Internally, Gloom's thoughts showed him to be glad that this was over with, as in hindsight, the Thestral didn't think this was actually anything serious.
Where's Crimson?
Prey asked after a moment, glossing over the last 3 minutes. He wasn't going to forget it, though. Looking for you, Gloom stated. Prey blinked, realizing his assumption had been wrong.
I thought you said you sent the Pegasus from Fleet Glass's squad off to do that.
No, Gloom started reluctantly. I decided it would be better not to break up the Corporal's squad. They know what they're doing and are used to working together. Prey gave Gloom a skeptical look. It quite clearly conveyed that Prey could see that what Gloom really meant was, I couldn't send them off chasing a lost child when that's what they should be doing back in Cantalar right now. Gloom grimaced, silently admitting something to that effect. A shout of, I already told ya, made Gloom's ears swivel back towards the barn, where raised voices were coming from, although it sounded like the guards had it under control. The shouts were more angry protests, rather than real outrage. The Apples knew they were in serious trouble.
I actually needed for anything, or were you just waiting out here to see when I turned up?
Prey asked. Fleet Glass and his squad are searching the house and premises. We'll be questioning Seed Apple and his family once they're done, Gloom said by way of answer, his eyes scanning the farmyard.
Do you think they'll know anything of value?
Prey asked, wanting to see what Gloom already suspected. Yes, Gloom said firmly. My special talent told me to question Pebble Mill, and it also meant we needed to come back here again. Probably, he amended.
So we're just running off a feeling in your flank,
Prey thought in annoyance. What was more annoying was that it was actually working.
Why did ponies get magical inborn assistance from their cutie marks when all other races had to do without? That was something Prey wanted to study if he ever got the chance, with scalpels and knives. Prey had heard that some zebras had cutie marks, but the only zebras he'd ever seen didn't. No, cutie marks were for ponies only. His current theory was that Celestia, the literal sun goddess, was involved somehow. Why else would they only appear for ponies? Prey stopped and cocked his head to the side, hearing what sounded like the displacement of air. Tilting his head back and squinting his eyes, he scanned the sky, good ear strained to pick up what had sounded like,
Ah, yes, Crimson.
Pegasus wings.
Crimson's back.
Prey said out loud, just as Gloom finally noticed for himself the Pegasi's return, coming down on a steep, looping spiral towards them, pinion feathers splayed. Crimson flew extremely quietly, considering he was wearing armor. He'd been up quite high, and for a moment, Prey briefly wondered how Crimson had intended to spot him from that height.
Pegasus eyesight,
Prey deducted. It would be useful if he himself had such eyesight, and perhaps people would take him more seriously if he had glaring yellow eyes rather than these big blue ones. Prey took an instinctive step back and closed said eyes as the spiky grass billowed and Crimson aligned next to Gloom. He glanced at Prey, then back to Gloom. You found him already, sir, Crimson commented.
Yes, thank you again for looking anyway. It seems we left him behind again, Gloom admitted.
Crimson blinked slowly. Ah, my apologies, sir. I should have been paying closer attention. Then he also looked to Prey. My apologies, Crimson added to him as well for some reason.
We could all have been paying more attention, Gloom stated. Now, enough wasting time. We've held up Fleet Glass and his squad long enough. Let's go and do our duty and ask lots of difficult questions. Why did you harbor your cousin, Pebble Mill, from justice?
I told you. I didn't know. Pebble Mill never said.
You already knew, though. Turf Apple told you as much.
No, listen to me. I didn't know. Turf never said what he done, neither.
So you admit that you knew you were bending, if not outright breaking the law?
No, I ain't done nothing wrong. I did what I had to.
Gloom groaned and leaned back in his borrowed chair, rubbing his eyes with one fetlock. Across the repurposed kitchen table sat a fidgeting Seed Apple. This scene was becoming quite familiar. Behind Seed Apple stood Crimson, making the stallion even more nervous, while Fleet Glass stood at attention by the kitchen door. Out in the living room, the rest of the Corporal squad waited with the other detained members of the Apple family.
Let's try this again, Gloom started patiently. And we can keep on doing this for as long as it takes. Why did you harbor your cousin, Pebble Mill, from justice? He repeated.
Prey, who was sitting unobserved by the food bin where he could keep everyone in his field of view, rolled his eyes at Gloom's persistence.
Just start threatening him already. It's plain as day to see he's scared and ready to cave.
Yesterday, Seed Apple had thought he was safe from the guards. Now, they had overrun his farm and taken him prisoner. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Ponies didn't seem to realize that they weren't in fact the chosen race, and that actions had consequences until they were staring them in the face. To top it all off, it was Royal Guard this time, with all its illustrious history and reputation, not just the new and still yet unrespected Night Guard. With that said, Seed Apple was rather more unnerved by the Thestral sitting in front of him than by Fleet Glass. Much like his cousin Pebble Mill, the farmer hadn't recognized Gloom as Pegasus he'd been confronted with yesterday.
Xenophobia is alive and well,
Prey thought.
I didn't know what he'd done. I still don't know. But he asked me and my family, so I had to say yes. He's my cousin,
Seed Apple said, trying to look Gloom in the eyes, but failing after less than a second.
What did Turf Apple tell you then? You've admitted you spoke to him, so what did he tell you?
Nothing. Really, he didn't say. All he said was that my cousin needed to stay out of town for a couple of weeks.
Gloom set his hooves on the table.
What? He asked slowly. Did Pebble Mill do?
Seed Apple hesitated, his thoughts racing.
It's not like they don't know already.
He cleared his throat.
He got blamed for helping start the big fight in town.
Why?
Gloom demanded insistently.
Because
Because what? No pony feels the need to hide unless he's done something serious. No pony else in Hastings felt the need to run away, Gloom told him. Prey caught Riley from Fleet Glass. Because the Swedish sheriff already put those ponies in jail before you ISND fellows went and released them.
Seed Apple made a face like he'd bitten into a lemon.
Because he put Yellow into the hospital, he answered sullenly.
Yellow Turn? Crimson asked for confirmation from behind Seed Apple, making the Earth Pony jump. The way the farmer had only listed his Yellow Turn's first name without thinking to clarify, he must be fairly well known within the community. It was also the same name mentioned by Willow Pot yesterday. Crimson so far had kept quiet and acted as no more than a silent observer to the interrogation up until now. Unlike with Gloom, Seed Apple clearly recognized Crimson as one of the Pegasi who he had denied access to yesterday. And now that the tables had turned, that knowledge was clearly eating away at him.
Yeah, that's him,
Seed Apple replied hesitantly. Crimson studied the other stallion. Why did your cousin want to injure Yellow Turn badly enough to remove him from Hastings' daily life? Crimson asked with unusually sharp insight, cutting to what was likely the heart of the matter. Seed Apple hesitated for longer this time.
Well, I ain't saying he was wanting to hurt Yellow Turn quite that bad. Pebble's just galloping with the wrong crowd, you know. Some of the more...
He struggled for the word.
Activinists? No, activist ponies. Yeah, on this side. And Yellow is with those on the other side. And when they all started angling for a fight, well, I imagine Pebble saw his chance to put a Yellow in his place and it took it.
Gloom frowned as he picked through Seed Apple's words.
And which sides are these you're referring to? He asked.
Seed Apple seemed genuinely surprised.
You mean you don't know? The Holden shares, of course.
The Holden shares, otherwise known as the crop holders or crop shares. That's essentially just the nickname for the party policies of the two competing candidates for the Hastings mayorship, Fleetglass explained as they marched off the farm, heading back to Hastings. Well, he and his guards marched. Gloom and Crimson walked like normal ponies, and Prey tried to keep up. At least they'd checked that they hadn't left him behind this time. Alongside them, the tall grass on either side of the worn track waved and hissed in the light breeze. Prey had never liked tall grass or crops. It limited his view too much. The issue was, to him, almost all grass was too tall. Prey hurried his pace. He really didn't want to be at the back of the group. Because that's where Seed Apple followed, head down, one of the Royal Guard unicorns escorting him, and hoof cuffs on his front legs.
Who are these two-party delegates, Corporal Glass? Gloom asked.
Don't know who it is locally for Hastings, sir, but I do know it's the same up and down the railroad. My father talks about it. Big Fields and Wheat Plow are the big shot leaders of each party, with their own candidates running in each town for the local elections. There's a lot of debate and campaigning going on. You must have seen the posters,
Fleetglass said, a slightly disbelieving look on his face as the words failed to garner any spark of recognition.
I'm afraid not, Corporal. I can't say I'm up to date with either local events or politics. Our reunion with Equestria largely left our clan out of the loot,
Gloom answered calmly. Maybe Gloom didn't see the slight toss of Fleetglass's tail, or the other small tails that passed around the Corporal's squad, but Prey didn't because he was looking. It seemed they held doubtful opinions on, if not the Thestral clan's reintroduction into society, then on the Thestrals being the basis for the formation of the Night Guard.
Well, I'll explain it the best I can,
Fleetglass said as they reached Hastings' housing line.
The crop holders want farmland to be privately owned. Their policy is that a pony should own the land they work, and they're pushing for grants and legislation to get that. Crop shares want farms to be combined and managed under one big management to better distribute resources and standardize earnings.
Fleetglass paused as he considered his words, then nodded.
Yes, that's more or less of it,
he summed up confidently. Prey knew that there had to be more to it than that. The sentiments and motivation of the candidates and the scope of the policies had to be much broader than that. And if asked, they'd probably zealously drum their methodology into your head at great length, too. Most of Prey's knowledge on politics was skimmed from the thoughts of others, but it wasn't hard to reach his own conclusion. Prey could see where both the holders and sharers were coming from. He knew the troubles they spoke of from sad personal experience. Although, as previously mentioned, there hadn't been anything like unicorns and election candidates in Prey's home village. Oh, there was an election, theoretically, but it was closed off in a private affair. It was only ever held by ponies, 4 ponies, and the rich, landowner earth ponies at that. The villagers never even tried to get a hoof in that scene.
Know your place and keep your head down,
was the unspoken rule. Making trouble was an easy way to get kicked off your farm and out of your home. Their landlords were the law. There was no appeal for unfair treatment, although thankfully their leaseholders were usually happy to stay out of their tenants' lives so long as they were up to date with their payments.
When it's ponies under the hoof, they can get together and protest. Yeah, when it's those same ponies doing the oppressing, no one bats an eye,
Prey thought sourly.
So, Big Fields and Wheat Plow are trying to get made the big boss of this town. How does that work?
Prey asked. The royal guards all glanced back at him when he unexpectedly spoke up, and Prey made sure to tilt his head curiously up at them. He'd kept quiet in their presence so far, not wanting to draw attention to himself. But asking a question any normal child might ask was fine, especially when he deliberately asked the question only half right. Adults always felt it their duty to help correct a child's misunderstanding. No, that's not how it works, little filly. Prey was it? Big Fields and Wheat Plow are the party leaders. Think like a big boss. All the ponies in town are holding elections to vote for who's going to be, let's say, the local small boss. These small bosses are part of the big boss's group. Big Fields and Wheat Plow don't stop in one place because they have lots of candidates, small bosses, to do that for them. The big bosses go to Canterlot, where all the real stuff happens. So that's why they can't be the mayor of Haysteam, Fleetglass explained, his words and manner unknowingly patronizing. Prey kept up the cute, bemused smile, not a hint of irritation. None of the Royal Guard squad noticed, but Gloom and Crimson were both giving Prey that disapproving look which said, "You're doing it again, and I do not approve."
So, which one is the big boss in Canterlot right now?
Prey asked, still playing the puzzled youngster trying to understand the world of adults. Fleetglass paused. It's neither of them, actually.
So, wait!
Prey frowned as if in deep thought.
Neither of them is actually in charge? Then why is every pony arguing?
He asked, using their pony terminology for once. Fools are always so innocent, a guard thought with a smile to himself. Well, every pony isn't happy with the current big boss, and so they want to elect a new big boss. Every pony knows there's no chance of a re-election, so it's either going to be Big Fields or Wheat Plow, since there's no question of any other party winning. Whoever gets the most candidates, the small bosses, elected in these towns becomes the new big boss. Make sense? Fleetglass asked Prey, not unkindly. Prey hoped he had a tragic, fatal accident in the near future.
Which one's which? Holders or shares?
Prey asked quizzically. Oh, did I forget to mention that? Fleetglass asked, looking to Gloom. The Thestral nodded, but his eyes lingered on Prey. Yes, you did forget, he confirmed. He should stop acting like a kid to get his questions answered. It's working, though. Gloom was forced to privately admit. Well, those aren't the official party names, but basically Big Fields is boss crop holder, and Wheat Plow is the boss crop sharer, Fleetglass informed the lamb. Prey nodded and digested all that information. He smiled brightly up at Fleetglass.
So, who's going to win in this town? The crop holders or the crop sharers?
Fleetglass shrugged and glanced at his squad. They all shrugged as well. Don't live here, sir. Haven't a clue, one of them summed up. Well, if I knew the answer to that question, I'd be a rich pony, Fleetglass chuckled to Prey. Aha, little fools, the corporal thought in amusement. Then he sobered. He can't be much older than Rocky Bed. We need to hurry back so we can rejoin the search. Fleetglass addressed Gloom formally. Sergeant Gloom, we've searched Seed Apple's premises and arrested him. Do you have any further orders from Captain Nighthawk?
I think we still need to talk with this yellow turn before our return. And there's still the matter of Turf Apple and all the other ponies from the cells,
Gloom answered. Sir, we have our own orders to return to Canterlot as soon as reasonably possible. A squad was needed to gain entry into Seed Apple's farm, and we'll pick up the ex-sheriff before our departure,
but Yellowturn is in hospital. You can reasonably interview him without us. Those other ponies on the list will be fined or prosecuted by the new sheriff once one is appointed," Fleetglass stated.
Gloom hid an ear twitch. "It would be poor execution of our duty if we left Haysteam without a sheriff, especially now," he said. They'd come to a stop in the middle of Haysteam, townsfolk watching them as they passed or from windows.
"Our duty is back in Canterlot," Fleetglass replied. "You're right, sir, but appointing a new sheriff is outside our jurisdiction. A Canterlot official will need to decide what needs to be done about this when we report back," he said confidently.
Crimson glanced sideways at Gloom, waiting for their sergeant's answer as the Thestral gritted his teeth. Gloom knew he couldn't give any new contradicting orders to override Shining Armors, and Fleetglass knew it too.
"All right then, Corporal. Can I trust you to take care of your duty to arrest Turf Apple before you return to Canterlot?"
Gloom asked, his dry sarcasm well hidden.
"Yes, sir,"
Fleetglass answered smartly.
"Then you have my orders, plus your own to follow. Dismissed."
The corporal and his squad all saluted, and with another smart, "Yes, sir," from Fleetglass, and then they all turned and marched off towards the jailhouse to pick up Turf Apple, dragging Seed Apple with them. Soon he'd be having a wonderful family reunion. Prey had his doubts they'd find the disgraced sheriff at the jail, more likely unconscious in some bar with an empty bottle in his hoof. But Prey wasn't going to offer any such advice as the three of them watched the Royal Guards march round the corner. He didn't care about their troubles, and he had his own to worry about, like whether he was going to survive the night. There'd only been one point today when Prey's worries had slipped his mind, and that was when he was being assaulted by the Mayor Honey Topaz with a hug at breakfast. The physical contact had temporarily blinded his mind to all but the instinctive fear and need to escape. It made for a poor distraction. Gloom was grimacing as he watched the Royal Guard's departure and thinking uncharitable thoughts.
"Were they not supposed to be assisting us, sir?"
Crimson asked, eyes following the Royal Guards, a disapproving tilt to his ears. It wasn't really a question, more like Crimson was double-checking that the Royal Guards had indeed just walked out on them.
"Yes," Gloom groused, "but they have their orders. It's fine. We will continue on without their assistance."
He looked down at Prey, who was shifting subtly on his hooves, eyes and ears twitching at all of the houses and ponies around them.
"All right, kid? What's on your mind?"
Gloom asked resignedly.
"Prey,"
Prey immediately corrected. "And," Gloom answered, not in the mood right now to change his form of address.
"And what? What are we going to do next?"
Prey asked, stopping his scanning of the area to look up at the Thestral.
"No, I'm asking you what you've thought of," Gloom said.
"Thought of what?"
"No, I'm asking you what. What?
"Sir, what are we talking about?"
Crimson joined in. Gloom paused to consider, or perhaps remember the answer.
Right. What are Everpony's thoughts?"
"On what, sir?"
Crimson asked.
Not you too. I meant, what do you think about what Seed Apple said?"
Gloom elaborated.
"I think,"
Crimson began in his usual cautious manner of thinking out each word before speaking it,
"that the cause of the recent riot can be attributed to fighting between those who are on holders and those who are on sharers."
He blinked slowly.
"At least, originally, sir. It seems to have escalated a bit since then."
"Okay, well, the riot was sparked by a fight between Pebble Mill and Yellowturn. It was just a spark. Ponies would never fight over nothing, so it must be something that goes further than just Pebble Mill and Yellow."
Gloom agreed, following along with Crimson's train of thought.
"What about the last two riots in Haysteam, sir? Were those both also sparked by these two ponies once tempers reached fever pitch, do you think?"
Crimson asked thoughtfully. That made Gloom stop and reconsider.
"If it was just the two of them, surely some pony would have put a stop to them rather than first riot. So, no. I think it must have been some pony or something else," Gloom said.
"What do you know, Prey? I mean, what have you thought of? You're always thinking about things."
Crimson cleared his throat awkwardly and straightened his wings.
Prey shrugged. "Does no one think it's strange?"
"No pony."
"If you don't accept my corrections, I'm not going to accept yours,"
Prey said as he rolled right on.
Does no one think it's strange that this is the third riot? That things have escalated to the point of a riot 3 times? It's like someone keeps coming back and stirring up the pot each time it starts to settle. And what about these 2 candidates for the sharers and holders? What do they gain from causing a riot?
Gloom looked surprised at the suggestion, but after a moment's thought shook his head.
It can't be political candidates. There's just nothing for either of them to gain. The riots hurt both of their election chances equally. They're not going to get ponies to vote for them by starting massive fights now, are they?
Don't measure your potato bushel against a wheat bushel,
Prey said simply. Pardon? Crimson asked, Gloom joining in with his confused look.
Nothing. It's just something an old mule used to say,
Prey said, waving it off. He waited, knowing one of them would ask.
And what does it mean?
Gloom asked after a patient moment. Prey smirked internally, just who he'd expected to ask. It was a pointless thing to internally bet on, but it was a small distraction from the impending confrontation coming tonight. There was no getting away from that, but he couldn't give any indication that he was worried about anything.
Oh, it just means don't assume you're working off the same measurement stick. The way you value something might be the complete opposite to the way another person does,
Prey said airily with another shrug. The old mule who'd said that had been called Mr. Barley. His were the charred remains Prey had found amidst the burnt-out ruins of the mule's own inn. Of course, he would never tell anyone about that bit. It still does not seem likely they would do something like this, Crimson said gravely. But I suppose it does not have to be them. Their supporters could just as easily have done it, if they felt strongly enough. Fanatics. Ponies like Pebble Mill and Yellow Turn.
There has to be more to it than just that. These riots can't just have been happening because a pony's taken campaigning too far,
Gloom said, ears tilted back as he regarded the buildings of Hay Steam with a thoughtful eye.
I think Big Fields or Wheat Plow could have a hoof in it,
Prey offered. Gloom dismissed the idea with a snort.
That's ridiculous. Why would they do that? It's against everything they stand for. The goal is to make ponies' lives better. It's precisely the very reason why they're trying to get elected. I could possibly, maybe, accept that one of their candidates is acting on their own, but not the actual party leader. I don't think I've really noticed before, but Prey's rather paranoid. Like, really paranoid.
Prey gave Gloom a little smile, like he was forgetting something.
What about all the other towns along the railroad? Remember, they've been having these problems too. Hay Steam is just the most recent in the chain.
That brought Gloom and Crimson up short.
Horse apples. We've been getting sidetracked with Hay Steam, getting in too close and forgetting the bigger picture with trying to fix here.
Gloom berated himself internally, tail flicking angrily. Prey simply waited. He didn't have any further epiphanies or insight to add, merely what he'd already said. Even if it's just one town, we can't leave Hay Steam like this, sir. Ponies are getting hurt, Crimson said, thoughts having apparently run along similar lines to their sergeants.
You're right. We still need to sort out what's happening here first before we go and help the rest of them. It's not right for neighborhoods to be so at odds with one another. Here and now is just as important as the bigger picture,
Gloom stated, seeming to regain his mental footing and come to that decision. Prey tisked to himself.
Just leave them to fend for themselves. It's not your problem if they squabble in the streets over who sits in the mayor's chair,
he thought.
All right, before we do anything else, let's stop and review what we know about the situation,
Gloom said. He gestured for the two of them to speak.
So, what do we actually know?
This is the third riot in Hay Steam, and it is one of a series that have been happening up and down in other railroad towns, Crimson promptly answered. Gloom nodded and added his own thoughts.
The most recent riot seemed to have been between crop holders and shares. However, it's obvious that was not the sole cause, just one on the surface.
There was a pause, no one thinking up anything definite that could be added. A cloud drifted overhead. How about Seed Apple and Turf Apple? Could they be involved with something deeper? Crimson cautiously offered. Gloom thought about it, scratching at his chest, his eyes turning to Prey.
Come on, help out here, he said.
Prey shrugged.
This Apple family seems to have bad blood with some people here. Yellow Turn, obviously, but maybe others as well.
What else do we know?
Gloom pressed, as if merely repeating the question would somehow allow them all to think up something new. That we need to help the ponies of Haysteam, Crimson put in.
He said what we know, not just wishful thinking,
Prey said. Prey, stop that. We've already decided that we must help, not just report back, Gloom commanded.
Speak for yourself. I have other things to do,
Prey thought, twitching an ear. All right. Gloom tried when no one came up with anything further. Regardless of what we don't know, what should we do next?
We need more information,
Prey stated immediately. Good. Now how are we going to get more information? Gloom agreed.
Go to the hospital and talk with this yellow tern,
Crimson suggested.
He's going to be just as biased and tight-lipped as Pebble Mill was. I doubt you'll get anything out that we don't already know,
Prey said. He vaguely wondered what sentence Pebble Mill would end up facing. That we will get out of him. Team, remember, Prey? We spoke about this. And any other better ideas? Gloom asked. The corners of Prey's mouth turned down at that.
I've an idea,
he answered neutrally.
I guess it's up to you as the sergeant to decide whether it's a better idea. Arrest both candidates and interrogate them. See which one gets the most upset and who comes to try and get who released. That way, we'll have an idea whether it's either the candidates themselves who are in on this.
Gloom let out a long, exasperated sigh. No. No, Prey. Just no. Do I even need to explain why that's not okay?
Actually, yes. It is a valid method for learning whether either of them is involved. See if another riot starts in their absence. If not, then that could be our answer. If one does start, then we'll be that much closer to knowing where to look next. It would also answer whether the riots are really caused by differences of opinions between crop sharers and holders, and if the answer is no, we'll still be able to gain a better understanding of what is.
Gloom's ears swiveled to focus entirely on Prey as he looked down at the lamb. And you see nothing morally wrong with that course of action, so long as it gets results? He asked carefully. He wasn't the only one of their little trio who was suddenly looking at Prey closely.
Don't patronize me, Prey scowled. It'll do no harm to the candidates in the long run if they are innocent. And it's not like the ponies in these towns need another excuse to start a riot. It'll happen regardless, so why not take this opportunity to try and solve it?
Prey responded. By the moon, Gloom thought in frank surprise. He really does think like that. Oh, hey, now I've got to accommodate teaching him morals somewhere along the line, too. Crimson's wings shifted and refolded themselves as he watched Prey alongside Gloom, signaling the thoughtfulness that his blank face didn't convey. Stop that! Prey snapped, tilting his chin back so he could properly scowl up at the two of them.
I can see what you're thinking, and I'm not an idiot. I can understand the concepts of morality and right and wrong just as well as you can. But that's not how whoever is behind this is thinking.
And that's no justification to act like them. We're better than them, Prey. And that's why we are here in the Night Guard. Because we know right from wrong. You can only fight wrong with right. Not wrong with wrong. Gloom told Prey firmly and without any room for argument, like he was explaining gravity. Who neglected to teach you right from wrong, kid? Is this why you were in prison? Gloom thought, his slit pupils drifting down to the gold bands around Prey's legs. Prey wanted to snarl.
What are you looking at? Crimson wears them too, you know. Don't think I haven't noticed how you're trying to act as a substitute mentor to him.
But he didn't say anything, and he held his peace. At least Gloom hadn't looked at him with pity, just resigned disappointment. If he dared to try that, then things would have gotten ugly. Prey knew he wasn't going to win this argument or prove anything further here, so he just looked away, pretending like he was conceding the point.
You can't fight wrong with wrong? Ha! Shows how much you know.
Prey looked to Gloom, waiting for the sergeant to make a decision on whether they would move on or continue belaboring the point. Gloom tried not to sigh. We're still in Haysteam and have a duty to fulfill. Back to the job. But what path should we follow, though? How can we solve this? Gloom thought. He looked around at the wooden houses about them, people's homes and businesses, all being put in jeopardy by the riots. What is best for them? We need help, Gloom decided, raising his head. Haysteam isn't going to solve itself, but neither are we if we don't get help. This problem is big, not confined to just this town. There's no shame in knowing when to ask for assistance, Gloom said, voice gaining confidence as he continued. A new sheriff is needed here. Fleeglass was right about that, and we'll need to report back and get one commissioned. Yeah, we need more pony power to cover all these towns. We'll go and interview Yellow Turn, then we'll return to Canterlot. From there, we can only see.
All right, sir, Crimson agreed.
Prey? Gloom prompted after a second.
Yes, sir.
Prey sighed. All right, it's decided. Crimson, fly up and find us the hospital, please. I'm not sure any pony here wants to speak with us long enough to give us directions, Gloom said, looking meaningfully towards the passing townsponies, who were still giving them a wide berth and trying not to catch Gloom's eye. Crimson spared the town ponies a flat look. Right away, sir, he answered, opening his wings. Prey supposed that Gloom and Crimson must find it very inconvenient to have to walk places instead of simply flying, just because they had wings and he didn't. Well, they weren't the only ones who felt that way. Prey certainly wouldn't have complained if nature had seen fit to gift sheep with wings. At least both of them were sensible enough not to again suggest carrying Prey. Prey did not go into the hospital. Or rather he did, but he didn't stay in there. After Crimson had guided them to the local hospital on the edge of town, Gloom had rung the desk bell, and after the receptionist had turned up, an earth pony of course, demanded to be taken to Yellow Turn. The receptionist hadn't hidden her fright of Gloom very well, and had made an excuse and hurried away the moment she'd showed them to the patient's door. Nothing new there. Everyone in this town was a cowardly racist. It wasn't a big hospital, and although Prey was no expert on the procedures of medical practice, he judged that this place could have easily been run by 3 doctors or nurses most of the time. Actually, that wasn't strictly true. Prey was something of an expert, but not on medical procedures for a clean, well-built, and plentiful stocked hospital such as this. He was more well-versed on things like the inner workings of the equine, goat, deer, and griffin body and emergency surgery. He worked on and suffered under his zebra-mentored snake's hoof in holding down, sewing up, or sawing off the limbs of screaming patients under the canopy of the deeper green. Those screams still haunted him sometimes. The hospital backed onto the open grassy plains in the edge of town. The individual patients' rooms were tidy but compact. Sliding screen doors in each opened onto a short, plank decking that allowed the patients' beds to be wheeled outside, giving them access to fresh air and sunlight, along with an unrestricted view of the endless grassy sea. The wooden decking was where Prey was now standing, cast in cool shadow from the hospital building, watching the spiky stems wave and ripple. A few inches from his hooftips, the decking ended and the green began, hissing and flowing in the wind. It was a small gap, but an important one. Just a step forwards and down, and he would be lost amid the tall grass. His ear twitched as he picked up a strain of conversation from the room behind him. In your own words, what happened between you and Pebble Mill that caused the fight which escalated into the riot? That was Gloom interviewing the bed-bound Yellow Turn. The earth pony had 2 broken front legs, and the left one quite badly. A double break, the first a displaced and the other a segmented break. He'd be walking with a limp for the rest of his life. Crimson was also in there, acting as the sergeant's backup, or, more appropriately, a spare body to stand as witness. Yellow Turn was a bit out of it. Prey didn't know what pain relief they'd given the stallion, but he could name 4 different plant extracts that could give much the same effect. As Prey had predicted, Yellow Turn was reluctant to speak with the guard. That Gloom was a thestral probably didn't help either. If Yellow Turn had been less drugged, perhaps that fear might have worked in the sergeant's favor. But alas. Gloom was patient, though, and he had pulled up a seat for the long haul. He hadn't objected when Prey had wandered out of the open door, thinking the lamb was simply bored. Luna knows we've been doing a lot of these tests and interviews today. So that was why Prey no longer was inside the hospital, instead standing out here in the open, watching the plane sway, and listening to the faint moaning of the wind every now and then. It was quiet, just the rasping of grass stems in the wind, the town cut off abruptly. There weren't even any birds out here. Back in the deeper green, there had always been birds and animals chirping or calling, except when something unseen was moving around in the dark. Then even the insects went quiet. In some ways, it was strange.
He'd spent almost 10 times as long locked away in Dreverton as he had in the jungle. Yet he had far more vivid memories of the deeper green than he did of his cell. Things had been harder, scarier, and far more violent under those trees. He hated Dreverton, but he feared the deeper green. Feared and respected. Prey had to struggle every minute to survive in there, while in Dreverton, he'd merely waited. Those violent memories seemed to take up more space in his head. Time was funny when it stretched like that. Now, it served to remind him just how different this endless grassy plain before him was. There were many different types of quiet. Prey liked some of them, worried about a couple, and was fearful of a few. This was an empty quiet. Prey felt there should be more noise, but the hospital building behind him that served to cast the cool shadow also acted as a windbreak. He was watching the small corpse of trees out in the green sea. There shouldn't be trees there. Exposure should have made it impossible. Yet a lone cluster of them had somehow managed to take root regardless. Bent and close packed together, dark trunks twisted into odd shapes by growing up in the ceaseless winds of the plains. There they stood, way out in the rippling green, the only thing breaking the horizon for miles and miles. The sharp scrape of the screen door being slid fully open made Prey glance back over his shoulder. Crimson came up beside Prey to join him on the decking, politely giving the lamb plenty of room. Prey returned to looking out on the plains, mind turning over the plans for the night and also what he'd overheard in the apothecary as he watched the trees.
Sergeant Gloom not need you anymore?
Prey asked after a moment, not turning his head.
No, Yellowturn will not say much.
Another moment passed, broken only by the rustling of grass and restless wind.
What are you looking at?
Crimson asked.
That.
The trees? Why?
Crimson asked, perhaps curious or maybe just bored. Prey didn't give a straight answer. Instead, he asked Crimson a question.
Have you heard of Wolfing Woods before?
I have not.
A pause.
Is that what those trees are?
Again, Prey didn't give a straight answer to the question.
A wolfwood is where a hungry entity lives. Any lone patch of twisted trees that grows where they shouldn't could be a wolfwood, although few know about them. The stories get passed around in farming communities. The name gets mentioned, like a haunted house, and details get changed. It becomes just a warning tale for children not to play in the woods, really. Still, you hear the stories, and when you see a patch of lone trees, you can't help but get a pricking in the back of your wool and wonder, wolfwood?
Crimson looked out across the grass at the dark trees.
Ghosts? As in haunted?
He asked flatly. The side of Prey's mouth quirked up as he watched the twisted trees along with Crimson.
That's what they're calling that corpse of trees in town. I overheard someone mention it, and asked more about it.
A half-truth.
They hear the wind blowing from the trees at night, carrying what sounds like howls, and someone said they'd seen lights, like yellow eyes amid the dark branches. If you look at it sideways, the swaying tree tops could almost be shapes of wolves, and the tree trunks their legs, no?
Prey asked pleasantly.
If that's what ponies look for, then that's what they'll see,
Crimson said shortly. His ears perked and looked over at Prey.
Do you actually believe that story?
He asked. Prey looked away from the trees for a moment to give him a strange grin.
What? You mean to tell me you don't?
He asked incredulously.
No, there was no such thing as ghosts, and I'm sure you don't believe in such things either,
Crimson stated. Prey shrugged.
Well, I've never seen a ghost, and every ghost story I've heard could easily be explained away as something else,
he admitted.
You didn't actually say if you believed in the wolfwood or not,
Crimson noted, shifting his weight on the decking.
Not the wolfwood, a wolfwood,
Prey corrected with mock serious tone.
And I never said I thought the woods were haunted, did I?
Crimson opened his mouth, then waited as a moan of wind passed before continuing.
Wolfwood, as in more than one? Are you saying that you do in fact believe in them?
He asked. Before he'd seemed dismissive. Now he was curious. Prey offered a small shrug and turned back to the plains.
I said wolfwood holds an entity that hunts. Certainly, some wolfing woods are just normal flesh and blood monsters. But what about the others? Is it all the same entity, or a different one in each wolfwood, linked somehow? But why should it exist? Perhaps because the hunt exists. an endless hunt for those who stray into its territory. Perhaps, who knows? It's all just hearsay pieced together from old tales. I doubt it's something we could fully comprehend anyway, he added.
Crimson tapped his hoof against the planking. But do you believe it? He asked seriously. Prey smiled again, but his eyes were hard.
In Wolfing Woods? Yes, that is something I believe in.
Oh. Crimson frowned faintly at Prey and thought, I have heard that all sheep are terrified of wolves. I had thought it to just be a generalization, he said. He was a bit blunt, but Prey doubted Crimson was trying to mock him, just asking a question in his own way.
As far as generalizations go, yes, I think it's an instinctual fear, especially of timber wolves,
Prey admitted. Timber wolves are hardly the most dangerous beast out there, nor the most plentiful, Crimson told him dismissively. Again, Crimson probably meant it to be bland reassurance, but this time Prey did feel mocked.
Maybe to ponies, timber wolves aren't much of a threat. Weaned ponies like you can just fly away at your leisure, can't you? A unicorn can conjure the one thing that timber wolves fear, fire, or any number of spells, or even just telekinesis to keep it at a distance. An earth pony is most at risk, but they still have the strength and resilience of their earth magic heritage to shatter a timber wolf in one kick, and then gallop off before it reforms. Did you know that timber wolves always go for the weakest looking member of the herd? Now look at sheep. What do you see? Now look at me. What do you think a timber wolf sees?
Prey demanded coldly. Crimson's wings flattened more fully to his armored back, hesitating. That is, I suppose I understand your point. I apologize that...
That what? That I'm a sheep?
Prey let out a huff.
That's the first time someone's ever apologized to me for my birth heritage.
He paused and narrowed his eyes at Crimson. Not really an intimidating sight coming from him, but the sentiment behind it was there.
Or are you sorry I was born a small, runty freak?
Crimson didn't seem to know what to say, his yellow eyes flicking back and forth, even his normally neutral ears folding back in a signal of his uncertainty. I do not... none of that. I apologize for none of that. I meant, I am sorry that you are afraid of timber wolves. Yes, I meant that. He straightened his wings and seemed to regain his composure. That is, if you are afraid of timber wolves, you did not actually say. Maybe he expected Prey to deny it, offering the lamb a chance to scoff at the idea and act brave, as a way of apologizing for his social blunder. Or maybe he just really thought Prey wasn't the type to be afraid of something like a timber wolf, because of how much he differed from everyone that might be called normal. If so, he was surprised when Prey laughed.
Oh yes, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of a lot of things. So many of them silly and irrational. And yes, I am most certainly afraid of being some wolf's prey. No pun intended, he giggled.
Crimson glanced out over the plains at the far-off clump of trees, and then back to Prey. Then, is that why you were watching this wolfing wood? Because you were afraid there might be a monster in there? He questioned cautiously. Poor Crimson. He was getting a lot of confusing answers today.
Oh, no. I'm not afraid of those trees.
After a long pause, as Crimson thought, or perhaps waited for Prey to elaborate further, then why are you watching them? He eventually asked. Prey gave the trees one last long look and turned back to the screen door.
That isn't a wolfwood. I was just checking to make sure, he answered casually. Oh, and I think Sergeant Gloom is just finishing up. We should rejoin him.
Prey wasn't sure why he'd bothered to explain all of that to Crimson, as he could tell the Pegasus hadn't taken it seriously. He'd taken Prey seriously, yes, but not the wolfwood. Seeing was believing, and as a Pegasus, he probably didn't understand the grimness behind the tales about wolfing woods anyway. Prey was very glad that the town's gossip had been mistaken on that account. He never wanted to see a wolfwood again. Oh well, there was no threat here, which made a decidedly pleasant change. At least sharing the story had offered a brief respite from Prey's other coming threat. They'd made the trek back up through the fine streets of Canterlot to the glittering palace, and now Prey and Crimson were once again in their now familiar position of waiting outside the Night Guard captain's door. There had been only one thing of note as they'd entered back in through the guard compound, a note by the name of Turf Apple. The disgraced ex-sheriff was being taken back to his cell, having just come out of an interrogation. He looked awful. There were dark bags under his eyes, his fur was wild, and his breath stank of alcohol. But there was a haunted look in his eyes, and he didn't even seem to recognize the ISND, the very ones who had exposed him, as he was forced to march past. When Prey caught his mutterings mixed with the stallion's thoughts, and he knew why, and it was an intensely uncomfortable reminder to him of his own vulnerable position. "Leave me alone, Nightmare Luna." Lies, lies, lies. No pony's reformed. Is she watching me now? No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Prey had stared after him as the stallion was half dragged away back to the cells. It seemed Luna had not been patient enough to wait for the courts and judges to get the confession out of Turf Apple. Nighthawk's report must have contained something that incensed the Moon Princess enough that she'd taken manners into her own hoofs. Not for Seed Apple, or Pebble Mill, or Yellow Turn, or any of the others had Luna taken an active role. Why? Boredom? A sense of vindictive justice? Not having a valid target until now? Prey didn't know why, but he knew one thing. He did not want that to happen to him, and he shuddered. "Keep up, Prey," Gloom called. But back to waiting in the corridor. Crimson was standing at attention while Prey sat, resting his hooves after the long trot. Inside the office, Gloom was making his report. It was just one more thing they'd been doing repeatedly over the short span of days they'd known one another. Or, at the least, been forced to work with each other. Prey had his eyes closed, busy trying to meditate on possible outcomes with his mystery stalker tonight. None of them looked good. The subtle message they'd left in his bed with the tulip petal couldn't help but remind Prey of a monster from the deeper green. Prey didn't know what it looked like, as it only came out at night. All that was visible was the light of its lure. Those who followed the angler's light vanished. This time, however, there was something of a cue to see Nighthawk. Gloom hadn't been inside 2 minutes when a pair of night guards turned up also looking to see the night guard captain. Prey heard their armored hooves coming from 2 corridors away, so he didn't more than glance up when they rounded the corner. It was a pair of Thestrals. "Is Captain Nighthawk in a meeting?" one of them asked. "Yes, he is in there with Sergeant Gloom," Prey heard Crimson answer, voice blank. "That's fine. We'll wait." After a moment's silence when Crimson didn't give any further indication or acknowledgement, they simply shrugged and moved to stand at attention alongside Crimson. A glance at their ears revealed their clan origins, a small stud that looked like a red stone set in the ear's edge.
Not Gloom's clan, and Crimson's clan didn't join Luna. So part of the third Thestral clan then,
Prey thought, briefly analyzing the pair of them before returning to his own worries. "So, you haven't been joined up long, right?" the slightly taller of the 2 Thestrals asked. "No," came Crimson's monosyllable answer. "How do you like Canterlot? I've only been here a month, but the nightlife is great. You know, when we're not on extra shifts and can go out and enjoy it and all." "It's fine," Crimson replied. The 2 Thestrals exchanged a glance, Crimson's reticence marginally perturbing them. Obviously, though, they still had something they wanted to ask. "Is it true what they say about your clan?" they asked, cutting the small talk. Prey paused to listen in too. This could be informative. "They're not my clan. Not anymore," Crimson said, his wings bristling just a bit. "Pardon me, but is the rest of it true?" the smaller one asked, a hint of excitement in his tone at the possibility of intrigue. Crimson paused. "That depends on what they are saying," he hedged. "At the council summit, did they really swear to never again serve under Princess Luna?" the Thestral asked, ears perked. "I was not there at the mountain during the summit, so I do not know," Crimson stated. "Oh, had they already exiled you by then?" The taller Thestral cleared his throat, interrupting his companion with a glare. "Oh, you're right. That was thoughtless. My apologies," the other one said with a formal dip of his head. "I chose to leave before they could exile me in all but name, so I know nothing of their motivations, but they will not be good ones, whatever they are. That is all there is to it," Crimson said. They lapsed back into silence as they waited in the corridor. The shorter of the two Thestrals was thinking, "That clan was always weird anyway. Don't need them ruining the hard work we're all putting in here. Double shifts again tonight." While his companion's thoughts were, "Always putting your hoof in your fangs. Dream. This is such a drag. That creepy lamb is looking at me. I can feel it. Weirdo."
So, at a minimum, the tall one was there when Princess Luna announced that I was going to be working for her,
Prey decided. He also deduced from listening to their thoughts that these three Thestral clans he'd been hearing so much about were probably quite small. Probably no more than 700 to 800 members each, adults and children included. That was next to nothing.
Thestrals are an endangered species, it seems,
Prey noted humorously. It was quite the gamble that the clans had taken in rejoining society after so many years in hiding. They decided to risk everything when Princess Luna reached out and made her offer to reinstate the Night Guard, with them as its founding members. Or perhaps they just hadn't been stupid enough to tell her no. How would a goddess take rejection? Not well, Prey imagined. So why had Crimson's clan refused? And why had Luna not wiped them out in retaliation? After all, she was the Sunwolf's sister. That was what Alicorns did. If someone thwarts you, destroy them so they can never do it again. Or maybe she had some other plan in store for them. "That Fullnapper, did you track him down yet?" The question came out a bit unexpectedly from the taller Thestral. Crimson looked at him. "The Royal Guards are still searching the city," he pointed out, as if it were obvious. The Thestral flicked his ears. "Well, if the Royal Guards ever told us anything, then perhaps we might have known that," he defended himself with a shrug. "You'd think they'd realize we're on the same team already," his shorter companion grumbled. They still hadn't given their names. The office door was pulled open and Gloom emerged, then stopped when he spotted the other two Thestrals.
"Sir, I think they're both already here,"
Gloom called back into the office.
"Good. Send them in,"
came Nighthawk's cold tones from inside the office. Gloom looked back at the two of them.
"Captain Nighthawk said for you two to go in."
He repeated the order, in case they somehow hadn't heard. The tall one nodded to Gloom as he passed. "We shall catch up sometime, sir," he offered politely.
"Maybe another time. Sorry, too much to do,"
Gloom replied wearily. When the office door closed, Gloom turned to both of them as Prey climbed to his hoofs.
"Well, we got the help we wanted. I'll explain in the office. We still got loads of paperwork to sort out in there. Talk while we work,"
Gloom instructed, leading the way. Gloom gave his wings a flap and rose off the floorboards for a heartbeat, just long enough for him to slot the scroll he was holding onto the top shelf.
"And that's the last one,"
he said, dropping back down. "Yes, that's the last one in the box, sir," Crimson agreed.
Gloom grimaced. How many boxes left to go?"
6. And a half, sir," Crimson answered promptly. The grimace grew.
Well, there goes the next 4 hours of my life,"
Gloom thought, muttering.
"When this is all over, I want my sanity back."
He turned to where the lamb sat on a rolled-out map of the railroad, corners pinned under files and boxes.
"How you doing with plotting out the best towns to guard, Prey?" "I finished that ages ago," Prey answered. "What? Why didn't you come and help us with the filing then?"
Gloom demanded. Prey looked critically up at the high shelves, then all the way down to the hard floor, then at himself. He raised one equally critical eyebrow at Gloom.
"And you had to fly to even reach up there,"
he pointed out.
"Ah, right, my bad,"
Gloom admitted, thinking,
"Going to need to get a ladder." "Anyway, you said the map is done?"
he asked, coming over.
"See for yourself, sir,"
Prey said, getting up and stepping off the map. Gloom looked over the paper. Above each of the small towns that ran along the train line were a set of numbers marked in pencil.
"The negative numbers show the order in which the towns have experienced riots, in descending order. The positive numbers show the order in which I'm predicting that the towns will be stirred up to riot, in ascending order,"
Prey explained, pointing out the numbering system. There were a lot more negative numbers than positive ones, and sometimes the positive numbers were repeated, showing that Prey was not sure which of the two possible towns it might be. Gloom frowned and took a step closer to get a better look at the small, neat text, which of course made Prey back off to keep out of Hoof's reach. It wasn't anything overt, just maintaining the status quo distance. Gloom and Crimson were already coming to expect Prey's quirk, and indeed even expect it and give him space. Gloom sucked in air over his fangs as he studied the map.
Captain Nighthawk said that he can get Captain Shining Armor to contribute a few Royal Guard squads, in addition to the 2 Night Guard squads. But not for another few days. The ships are too packed, what with Rocky Bed still being missing. He doesn't think it's long before the newspapers get a hold of the full napping story either, Gloom said, his eyes tracking over the map. Good job on making this, Prey, he remembered to add.
How long can the squads be committed to this plan, sir? Crimson asked, coming over to have a look too.
Prey moved to the other side of the map. That's the bad news, I'm afraid. Only a week. After that, it's just the Night Guard squads on their own. But any longer than 2 weeks?
Gloom shrugged and rubbed his chin.
How confident are you that they will catch this pony, Prey?
Not very. I estimate a 1 in 10 chance to succeed, even following the rotating squad movement set out here,
Prey answered.
Then why did you suggest this? Gloom demanded, a bit annoyed.
I was putting a lot of faith in you with letting you come up with this plan.
Would you have preferred to have done nothing?
Prey responded. He would have personally preferred doing nothing, but Gloom and Crimson were determined to
do their duty. And besides, that's only the Royal Guard I'm talking about,
Prey added. Are you saying you don't think that they are competent in doing their job? Gloom asked, looking askance at Prey.
The Royal Guard are stubborn, brash, narrow-minded, and blind,
Prey said without any particular malice.
Every pony. Everyone knows what the Royal Guard looks like. They stand out like an albino raven in their shiny gold armor. The paragons of justice, reliable and beloved by all,
Prey snorted, ignoring Gloom's tail flick.
And that's just the problem, isn't it? Everyone recognizes them.
And thus so will the criminals we're after. You're right on that account. The Royal Guard isn't, subtle,
Gloom agreed as he realized where Prey was going with this. But the Night Guard can be? Crimson asked.
If the Night Guard sticks to its name and does the surveillance at night, then yes. Full Thestral squads with night vision, hiding on a low-lying cloud. No one would ever spot them. The pony we're looking for isn't going to cause trouble when they know the Royal Guard is around. So when they don't think anyone is watching, that's when they'll do so. Have the Royal Guard retire for the day, and then we see who comes out of the woodwork at night,
Prey said. I doubt that the Night Guard squads are going to only be Thestrals. Almost half the squads had at least some mixed heritage, even if they're all supposed to be only temporary, Gloom cautioned. But Prey could see the sergeant already thinking about finding a way around that.
We could ask Captain Nighthawks to mix up the squads to get only Thestrals, sir, Crimson suggested.
The non-Thestral Night Guards won't like that, Gloom reflected, considering.
So what?
Prey asked.
That's just them being racist again. Get Captain Nighthawk to give the order, and they'll have to go along with it whether they like it or not. Besides, you don't need a full squad of Thestrals to watch one train. You only need one lookout, then spread the rest through the town on the rooftops. These towns' populations are predominantly earth ponies. They rarely look up, and especially not at night,
Prey told them. Now you're the one being racist, Prey, Gloom warned. And just because you can order some pony around doesn't mean you should abuse that power. Soldiers do have to trust their commanding officer. That said, Prey could see that the sergeant was slightly pleased inside that someone had complimented the Thestrals for once instead of simply insulting or fearing them.
How do you know they never do? Look up, I mean, Crimson asked as well.
Just an observation I've made. What's the point of looking up at night if you can't see in the dark? Perhaps during the day, when you can see birds and clouds, yes. But at night, when you'd rather hurry up and get inside, no, it's not practical. So most just don't,
Prey said simply. Gloom grimaced slightly. Too many ponies think like that. Princess Luna goes to all that work and no pony ever even looks up, he thought. But he accepted Prey's logic.
I see. That does make sense, Crimson nodded.
Okay, Gloom said decisively. We'll take the revised plan to Captain Nighthawk later when he returns and see if he approves. It won't come into effect for another 2 nights, days anyway, so there's time to switch up the squads.
We cannot attend, Crimson suddenly said.
Pardon?
We cannot attend, Crimson blinked slowly. Prey cannot fly, or see in the dark, or keep up with us, sir, he explained.
Absolutely no tact, Gloom sighed internally. Crimson, that's not quite how you should, he began, but Crimson seemed to have realized his own social blunder this time and made to correct it.
My apologies, Prey. I did not mean that as an insult to you.
He quickly apologized, and for the second time, Prey caught the Pegasi mental walls shifting just enough to let a thought slip through.
Second time today. My father would be ashamed if he thought I ever insulted some pony for being born the way they were.
And then the walls came down again, locking Crimson's thoughts away. Prey, however, just shrugged, ears flopping. As I've already said, I'm aware of my own physical weaknesses and limitations. I'm not going to throw a tantrum if practicality demands that we plan around it. Life isn't fair, he said. If you're mocking me or treating me like a child, however, he thought. Well, all right then, Gloom said, looking between Prey and Crimson, checking that there really wasn't any problem. Okay, so we can't take part in the surveillance. We'll just have to help from the sidelines and continue with our investigation.
Pardon me, sir, but did Captain Nighthawk say if the Royal Guard were any closer to rescuing Rocky Bed and catching his full-napper? Crimson asked.
Gloom sighed. He said they hadn't found anything. Not a single damn thing, he admitted in frustration.
How about Tulip Bed, sir? I mean, have they found a way to restore her memories or help her yet?
Gloom's tail started flicking in anger as he thought about the mare's fate. No, they can't do that either. Whatever swamp scum did this to her, they did a thorough job. I'm just glad she's still able to walk and talk. Captain Nighthawk said that the Elite Solar Guard was dealing with a similar secret case recently, and those victims are still in the mental hospital. Nor do they know if they'll ever recover, Gloom said grimly. Prey felt a touch of vindictive satisfaction as he heard Gloom relate that. Good, that's what you get. Captain Valor should have accepted my offer. The moment of grim silence continued as Gloom and Crimson thought on that for a minute. Wait, speaking of injuries, Gloom thought, his attention shifting to Prey. Sorry, kid. Prey. I forgot, but you said you needed a new bandage this morning. In the rush, I forgot we needed to go and get your ear changed. We'll go and do that right now, Gloom said. No need, it can wait, Prey replied. Prey, you can't be so cavalier about your health. If you still refuse to see a doctor, then you have to look after yourself. And why didn't you say anything before we left? Gloom asked, heading for the door. Prey didn't follow him. You forgot, and then we left to catch the train. There was no time, and I don't need a new bandage now, he answered. Prey, you could have just said or asked us to take a moment to help you. Gloom sighed. This again, refuses to ask for help. He stopped, his hoof on the door. And why don't you need a new bandage? He asked as he fully processed Prey's answer. Crimson had been looking at Prey's bandaged ear since the conversation began. It's changed. That is a fresh one, he announced. When did you find time to get that changed? Wait, Gloom said, stepping closer to have another look. That isn't a bandage. It just looks like white cloth. I found something else to change it with, Prey said, shrugging. It was better than waiting until you remembered. Prey, just say something next time. In fact, make that an order. And where did you get time to change it? Gloom pressed. Prey met his gaze levelly. In Haysteam, when you left me behind, I decided I might as well do something useful with my time, he said calmly. Gloom breathed in deeply, taking a moment to close his eyes. Prey, the conversation at Seed Apple's farm we had. Did you steal that bandage? Prey didn't even blink. Yes. That got a stir out of both Gloom and Crimson. Why would you do that? You stole? They asked at the same time. I needed a fresh bandage. And there were cotton napkins in a pile. You forgot, so I solved the problem without bothering you. Why is that an issue? Because you stole something. As a member of the Night Guard. Not that it would have been acceptable even if you weren't, Gloom said angrily. Then perhaps you shouldn't complain when I take actions to maintain my own health when you forget, Prey returned. Stop trying to shift the blame. You're my responsibility, but it was you who stole. A single napkin? That makes no difference, Prey. Stealing is still a crime no matter the value. It's not something that would even be missed. Just one of many cut from a bolt of cloth en masse, before being dumped in a pile and forgotten about. Gloom looked at him. Prey, You're going to return the napkin and make an apology. That's final, Gloom commanded. Crimson's wing did that dismissive little flick in agreement, like the sergeant's words should have been the final say in the matter.
They will not want it back now that it's been used, and we are unlikely to return to Hasteme anytime soon,
Prey pointed out in annoyance.
You can send a written note in the post, along with the monetary compensation, too, Gloom responded.
Definitely impossible then. I have no money.
You get paid at the end of the week. You can do it then, when we have a day off, Gloom said, knocking aside the lamb's protests.
Why won't you just admit you're wrong?
Gloom thought angrily.
Because I'm not wrong. My actions were completely logical, and if it wasn't for Crimson's sharp eyes, I would have been able to spin a lie that you wouldn't be any the wiser.
Prey thought in answer, but he just kept quiet.
Is that understood, Prey? Gloom asked loudly.
If that's what you want, sir,
Prey answered calmly, dipping his head in submission. Gloom scowled.
Are you just saying that because we're telling you to? He demanded.
Prey tilted his head.
Yes, you're telling me to just agree and do as you say. That's what I'm doing. Isn't that what you wanted?
He asked. No, Crimson spoke up, a tad louder than necessary. He quieted back to normal when Prey winced and turned to look at him. You stole. Stealing is wrong. You stole when there was no good cause to. You should right your wrong for your own sake, not just because you were told to do so. It is as simple as that, Crimson said.
You should do it because you want to make amends. You're not stealing because you enjoy stealing, are you? Gloom asked.
No, obviously not. I just needed a fresh bandage.
Prey responded like it should have been obvious.
Then there's your reason. Do it because you wouldn't want some pony stealing from you. So don't do it in return.
Gloom finished seriously.
I get it now. He felt it was necessary, so he stole. Did you have to steal often back home, kid?
Prey was growing increasingly irked by this pointless exchange, their annoyance at him fueling his own.
I have so many better things I could be doing right now. If only I was free.
This was a pointed reminder that he wasn't. He was bound in service to a moon goddess, and these two fools were her willing servants. Crimson should have been, if not an ally, then a mutual prisoner united in hate against their Alicorn jailer. Instead, he was grateful for having someone giving him a direction, even if it was those who had chained him and confiscated his father's wing blades.
Fine, I shouldn't have stolen. I will do as you say. Send reparation money and an apology letter,
Prey said, refraining from the minor temptation to add the snarky,
will that satisfy you?
That suggested itself. It would be a poor decision to seem rebellious.
Bow your head, know your place.
Good, Gloom said. And next time, just ask. I keep saying this, but just ask. We could easily have gotten you a proper bandage. There was absolutely no need to steal, Gloom repeated.
Prey looked away molishly, making a show of feeling a mix of guilt and anger, because that's what they expected of him. Gloom was wrong. You didn't ask for help. You might need it, and if it was offered, you might even take it. But you should never ask for it. Never show any weakness. Never become dependent on anyone else.
Right. We're putting this behind us now, okay?
Gloom asked, looking at both of them, but more to Prey.
You've made a mistake, but you're gonna make up for it. So we move on now and forget about it and get back to work. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Don't think this means you're getting out of writing that letter, kid, Gloom warned, pulling the lid off another box of files.
Yes, sir,
Prey repeated, and mentally he moved Gloom up one place on the list. Gloom assigned Prey to make a written explanation of the map and his theory on the best distribution of the Royal and Night Guards. Gloom seemed confident that Prey wouldn't make a purposeful mistake out of spite just for getting told off, and he was right, although not quite for the reasons he thought. Gloom thought Prey wouldn't want to lose any more of their trust. Prey merely judged it not advantageous at this time to provide misinformation to the Night Guard. Prey wrote out a formal report, using the correct Form 3B.7 and the space provided to make the recommendation, while Gloom and Crimson went on with emptying the last of the files from the boxes, and then pinning up the bits of reports they thought relevant to the ISND's three main objectives on the corkboard, and linking them together with colored string. Prey didn't know why the string was necessary, but he supposed it served as a useful visual link for those with less impressive recall than his own. Prey couldn't judge if Crimson was still put off by his petty theft. As always, it was a bit hard to judge with the Pegasus, but it didn't seem like it. Prey sat with his back to them, pressing on the dusty floor to fill out the report. Still no desk, and their deep clean the other day had only scratched the surface. Prey didn't usually like people at his back, but he could rely on his ears to keep track of the other two's location whilst he worked. In truth, he was hiding the runes he was inscribing into the floor. It wasn't a fire trap or anything as hideously lethal, just a basic runic array, but leaving off the final completing rune. That rune was interchangeable, and depending which he finished the array with, would determine what it ended up doing. Prey didn't have any plan that required this array, nor any immediate need for it, but apparently they were going to be spending a lot of time in this office, and Prey planned to lay the foundations as they worked. A rune here, an array there, and slowly he could turn this room into a potential fortress.
That is,
Prey thought with that nasty fluttering twist in his stomach,
if I survive the night.
Accordingly, Prey didn't spend much energy forming the runes, conserving his strength for whatever was to come. However, he did not stop his work. Prey was playing the long game, never ceasing to make backup and contingency plans no matter how rudimentary, even when staring death in the face, especially when staring death in the face. There was no better time to have contingency plans. Prey was under no illusions. He was in a hostile environment. Canterlot was not safe. He couldn't do anything about the greater danger, Luna and Celestia, but he could and would make plans to protect himself against the rest. And hope it was enough. Prey didn't trust hope. It was a bright light to follow. Bait.